So it's important to be clear that the practice of meditation is fundamentally a practice of two things. One is it's a practice of paying attention. And another thing that it is it's a practice of being intentional, having high intention. And if you practice those two aspects of meditation, it will allow you to bring those skills into your day-to-day life. Enough can't be said about the difference it makes when you're paying attention to life versus just mechanically going through life, living in a mental state that plays patterns and being distracted and being reactive and living in a view that is limited and a view that is full of suffering and a view that is full of unrealistic expectations. And this is one of the reasons why I, as a psychologist, that it's really clear to me that meditation is a very, very practical thing. It's not religious. It's not even spiritual in a sense. Because what it really is about is it's about your interest in experiencing a life worth living. It's about your interest in experiencing being at home in life. It's about your interest in experiencing quality, happiness, a sense of well-being. It's about you're interested in not being a detriment to yourself. You know, it's important to begin with the recognition of what's actually happening. I think this is the first step for people is to begin with a recognition of what's actually happening. And for most human beings, that's a step that's not taken. Most human beings don't take the first step, which is to recognize what's actually happening, to recognize that you're suffering, to recognize that you're not happy, to recognize in many cases that you're miserable, and to recognize that your understanding of why that is a misunderstanding. That for most people, their understanding of the reason that is has to do with other people, has to do with circumstances, has to do with being unlucky, has to do with being unfortunate, has to do with having the wrong parents, has to do with being born in the wrong place, has to do with being the wrong color, has to do with being the wrong gender, has to do with being too young, has to do with being too old, has to do with not having enough money. You know, in the ordinary way that most people are experiencing life, that's the drama. That's the way it all occurs. And so there is not even a looking to see what's happening, and to recognize that if that understanding of how things work, if that's understanding of how life works, then why is it then that the things that people do to try and resolve those problems and those issues don't work? That to try and control life doesn't work, to try and control other people doesn't work, to try and control time doesn't work, to try and control your body doesn't work, to try and control your appearance doesn't work. And as Paul Hederman says, maybe the most important thing to be gotten from paying attention to the ordinary way that most people are experiencing life is to recognize that it's a failure. This is the first step. You know, in Buddhism, for example, the first noble truth is life is suffering. Well, what does that mean? It means that the way that most people are experiencing being alive is that life is a difficult experience. Life is a negative experience. Life is a struggle. Life is something that people are coping with. Life is something that somehow is inherently unworkable, unfair, cruel. And so, because that's the case, people continue to perpetuate the idea that somehow we're going to deal with that in an effective way by distracting ourselves, by playing the game that people play, that who can die with the most toys, you know, by playing the games that people play, by trying to have enough money to be secure and be in control, by playing the games that people play by trying to control their relationships, try and control their body, try and control their circumstances. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that this is not a workable approach to living a life. And yet, although that's the case, the majority of human beings continue to do that, continue to play the game, continue to. And I think the reason that that's the case is because the majority of human beings are living within an understanding of life that is a closed understanding. In other words, most human beings are living in an understanding of who they are and an understanding of life that is not questioned, That who you are is not a question that most people come to deal with in their entire lives. That what is the nature, what's happening here is a question that most people don't deal with in their entire lives. It is something that from the very beginning is not questioned, it's presented to you as a child before you have the ability to question anything. And you're indoctrinated and conditioned in such a way that who you are is not a question. It's obvious who, for most people it's obvious who they are. For most people, it's obvious what life is. That's why if you ask most people those questions, they give you the standard answers. And not only do they give you the standard answers, but they're perplexed at why would you ask that question? Why would you even ask who you are? That's silly. Why would you ask what life is? That's silly. You should be paying attention to, making money. You should be paying attention to, the things that really matter. Those things are things that philosophers deal with. That's not what people in the everyday world deals with. So the first thing that has to happen in order to take this seriously is to come to the recognition that the life that you're living is not workable. One of the things in my own experience, as I was trained and was practicing being a psychologist, one of the things in my own experience that was really powerful was the fact that here I was being trained in how to help people to be healthy, to have a healthy mental life, to have a functional relationship with the world and with other people. And in the process of doing this work with people, and I think this is pretty common, in the process of doing this work with people, there was an experience of being inauthentic. There was an experience of being inauthentic because here I was doing this work with people, providing so-called answers for people, helping people to get out of emotional and psychological suffering. And the reality of it was, in my own life, I was suffering the same kinds of things. My relationships weren't workable. I mean, and my experience of life was very similar to the people that I was working with, in terms of I might not be overwhelmed with anxiety, I may not be overwhelmed with depression, my relationships may not be as horrible as some other people's relationships, but that's all just a matter of degree, right? And so that was something that really troubled me. And as I met other psychologists and psychiatrists, what I saw with them is it's the same thing. Their lives weren't working. You know, when we got together and talked, we talked about, you know, their recent divorce, or how their relationship is full of conflict, you know, or how they were dealing with their anxiety and depression. The same bullshit that everybody else was talking about and dealing with. And so for me, it became a very disturbing experience to work with people and to maintain a pretense that I was a model of well-being and health. And I think that's what, for me, stirred up the whole idea of, wait a minute, if I'm doing this work with people, ought I not to be an example of what I'm doing? Ought I not to have taken the medicine myself and experienced that it worked before I, you know, sell it to other people? And I think this is one of the big fallacies in the mental health system. You know, that it's the blind leading the blind syndrome, right? That if you really knew if what you're doing to work with people really worked, it should work with you, and you should know that it works because it works with you. So because of that, I really got to a place where I was feeling desperate in terms of, is this what it is? Is there really any solution? Is there really any answer? And that's what brought me to investigate meditation and investigate some of these other teachings from the East and the wisdom teachings. And what I discovered through a commitment to really understanding and practicing meditation was that this did work. This did work. And so then I had a basis from which to work with people that had a realistic and authentic reality to it, an authentic foundation to it. And now, you know, it's not that long ago that non-dual psychotherapy came into existence, and it is now growing in its existence. And that's a form of psychotherapy that utilizes meditation. It's a form of psychotherapy that's founded on the idea that the real source of the suffering is a misunderstanding about who you are. I can't imagine at this point, I just can't imagine the idea of working with people and ignoring that fact. I can't imagine working with people and ignoring that fact. Even if the person that I'm working with views that type of understanding as very foreign to them, you know, that's not something that they could grasp, or it's not something that they would immediately recognize or see at all. Even if that's the case, when I'm dealing with somebody, that's still the foundation that I'm working from, you know, with the idea that at some point we can get to that in the process. Right? So then what does it take? You know, once that gets introduced, once you're introduced to this, once you get the idea of it, it has to become something that you take on to be your own. Right? It has to be something that you take. In other words, you have to recognize that this possibility of being awake and aware, and this possibility of being able to be in life with your attention on life instead of being in your head, is a real possibility that offers you the possibility of being at home in your life and being happy and having your relationships work and having your life work. And having the ability to deal with fear, having the ability to deal with the challenges that are inevitable in life, having the ability to deal with the unpredictability of the whole thing. So what it takes is in meditation, again, attention is critical and intention is critical. And in meditation, we're developing the ability to consistently pay attention, and we use the breath, right? But the translation of that, when meditation becomes a way of being in the world, the translation of that is paying attention to life, not the breath, paying attention to life. We know that there are people who report being in the quote-unquote zone, right? And when they report being in the zone, they're reporting that they're so completely involved with the activity they're engaged with, whether it's long-distance running, playing tennis. I heard a guy talk about this the other day, and he was saying that he had to write, he had a law brief that he had to write that involved him really digging in and studying and understanding and learning all the facts involved, and then really focusing to write this thing. And he reported that he started to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He didn't know where the time went. And during that time, he felt elated, and he felt relaxed, and he felt peaceful, and he was being very effective in the work that he was doing. So he was in the zone. The zone can occur in any activity that you're completely engaged with, where there is no self-reflection or no inhibition or no concern about yourself, no attention on yourself. All the attention is out, is going out. And so to live in the zone means that you're paying that kind of attention to life, that you're paying that kind of attention to what's happening. And then you have the intention and the attention to pay that kind of attention to what's happening. And when you do that, you start to see what's actually happening. The dots start to connect. You start to see when things aren't working in your life, you can see what's happening, that's the case. It's not a mystery anymore. You don't need psychotherapy. You can see. Your eyes open up and you can see, and you can begin to self-correct. You can begin to self-correct. Somebody, I heard this the other day. I'd heard it before, but, when airplanes are flying from one destination to the other, they're off course 90-something% of the time. They're off course 90-something% of the time, right? And the pilot has to keep adjusting the course to stay on course because of all the factors, wind, different factors, and the computers aren't 100% accurate that are guiding the plane. So it's the same thing in life. When you're awake and you're seeing what's really happening, you can make adjustments, You can keep adjusting what's happening in relationship to what's going on in your mind, because your mind's going to take you off course. It's going to take you away from what would work in relationship to what's going on in your life. Right? So this whole business of practicing meditation needs to be understood in terms of it being practical. It's very practical. It has to be connected for you with the quality of your life and the way you're functioning. And you have to have high intention. You have to be willing to pay attention to what's going on in the inner reality. And you have to start to use the teachings from the wisdom teachings. You have to take, for example, the idea that you have no say-so about what happens, what comes up for you emotionally, or what thoughts come into your mind. You have no agency about it. You have no say-so about that. That's a major discovery. That's a major discovery. Because with that understanding and then paying attention, you can now correct your course. You can now not follow your irrational reactions. You can now not follow your unrealistic beliefs. You can pay attention and see in real time what's working and make adjustments in real time. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And if you start to practice meditation and you start to learn these things, it's very important for you to look and see, is this making a difference in my life? Right? Is this making a difference in my life? It's got the potential to do that. If it's not making a difference in your life, then it's important to look and see what's where is it falling apart? Why is it not translating? Why is it not translating? It may be that the way you're practicing is not correct. It may be that your understandings are still off. And that's one of the reasons why it's good to have guidance, and not have to be building the plane that you're flying in the air. That's not a good idea. The thing is, it's not black or white. It's not gray, right? It's black and white at the same time. You see, that's non-duality. It's black and white at the same time. And one of the things that you can practice in non-duality to kind of get used to it, because it is the truth. It is what's actually happening, right? We've been conditioning to see things that aren't actually happening. We've been conditioned to experience who we are as something that's not actually who we are. We've been conditioning to see a world that's not actually the world that is actually the world, right? And so when you understand that non-duality is a fact, and that in itself is, for most people, challenging, right? The idea that non-duality is a fact, because people are so entrenched and so hypnotized and so programmed in a dualistic world. The idea that I'm separate from you is dualism. The idea that you're separate from the world is dualism. People are so totally into that being the truth and reality, right, that you really have to gradually deconstruct it. And you really have to start to practice seeing a non-dual reality. Now, here's an example of non-dual reality, right? To practice noticing, for example, that everything that you see in your visual field, right, is one thing. It's all consciousness. Nothing is separate from anything else. If you look at in your visual field, that's the way it actually is. Nothing is separate from anything else, is it? It's all related to everything else. There's nothing standing by itself. There's nothing set apart from anything else. The same thing is true with your senses, right? What you hear is the same as what you see. It's happening all at once. It's one thing. What you hear is the same as what you see. What you taste is the same as what you hear and what you see. What you feel is the same as what you hear and what you see. It's all happening at once in the same field. It's all consciousness itself. And there's no distance between you and this. There's no distance. You can look and start to see that that's so, that there's no distance between you and everything that's happening. And the reason there's no distance is because you are that. You can start to see that, right? In the beginning, you may have to play with it a little, right? But you can begin to see that, and when you begin to see that, it begins to change your brain. Your brain starts to recognize reality. And your brain starts to reprogram itself, neuroplasticity. It begins to reprogram itself to get related to reality. And as that happens, you will naturally be operating consistent with the way things actually are. And that's a functional life. When you're living consistent with the way things actually are, your life is working. When you're living consistent with the way you actually are, you experience the fulfillment that's possible for you as a human being in this life. That's the deal. So the only question is, will you get clear about that enough to maintain the intention and the intention and the attention consistently, and make it the priority that it needs to be in order to be awake and aware and live the life that's possible? That's the question. So I'll leave you with that question.